plan tonight is to finish the parable of the signs of the future from the fig tree, which is included, it's one of the few parables included in all three of the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We started it 2 weeks ago. John had to fill in for me last week because I wasn't feeling well, and he wanted to do a different one, so y'all did the parable of the wise and foolish virgins last week, and so tonight we're going to finish the fig tree parable, and the plan is, you've got a second handout, because I only gave you a portion of the handout 2 weeks ago, because I knew we weren't going to finish that parable in fact, but hopefully we'll finish it tonight. Next week, the plan is to look at the last parable on your list, because the ones that fill in between this one and the last one have all been covered previously, because they tie into some of the other parables that we've done. And so next week, the plan will be to look at the one out of Matthew 25, which is the sheep and the goats. And then the next week is Halloween. The plan is to take that night off. Yay, go trick-or-treating, wear your costumes, do whatever you want to do. And then the hope is on the 7th of October, November, thank you. If you guys are interested in it, is to do a study on the women's role in the church. That's a big deal, has been for probably 15 years. I don't know that we've ever really spent much time here at Central studying it in any great detail. I know we've never done a class on it that I can remember. So that's the plan. That would probably be 4, 5, or 6 weeks, which would take us up to Christmas and end the year. So unless there's some great opposition to that, that's the plan. The plan is also to see if we can get a few more others who might be interested in that topic to come join us on that Monday night. So if it's okay with you that we're doing that, and I say that seriously because this is your class primarily. You guys are the ones that have been coming all the time. And so if you didn't want to do that, we'd do something else. But if it's okay to do that, I'm going to advertise that to the rest of the church and see if anybody else wants to come in and join us on that topic. Thoughts, questions, observations, anything on that idea?
The merrier.
Pardon?
The more the merrier.
Okay. And you'll be here, right, Teresa? By then you'll be back?
November 7th?
Yeah.
You get back on 5th. I get back on 5th.
Okay.
Yeah, I start my class on the 9th.
Okay.
8th.
Whatever it
Glad
is.
you guys know.
Time flies when we're having fun. Now let's pray and we'll get started. God, we thank you for tonight. We thank you for all the love you show us all the time. I pray for your Spirit to continue to guide us and help us in our discussions as we talk about these parables. God, especially this one tonight, which is probably one of the toughest ones to be understood by people who study your word. So let your Spirit guide us, I pray. Open up our discussion to questions and help us to come to the conclusions you want us to. God, thank you for being with us tonight. I pray you'd be with Alvis and Chi-Chi, who are usually here but are traveling out to Nebraska. I pray you keep them safe. Watch out for them. I pray you be with Jay. He's been struggling a lot lately with some health issues. I pray that you'd be with him and help him to recover from those things he's been dealing with. Be with Heather, who's not here tonight, and just pray that you'd be with her as well. God, thank you for all that you do for us. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. So we're not going to go back and review what we did a couple of weeks ago. We're going to pick up on page 5 of your handout, the first handout that you got. And I want to read some, and tonight, simply because of what we're doing, we may be doing a lot of Bible reading to try to make sure we know what we're talking about. So let me start by reading Matthew chapter 23. And if you remember, we've already covered the parables looking at context. You can't just read the parable. I believe in this particular parable especially, you got to go at least a chapter before to figure out what we're talking about, and we'll see by the time we're done tonight. I think we may even have to go a chapter beyond. But in Matthew chapter 23, and we looked at this last week, but to set the context again, says, Jesus speaking, says, "You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell? Therefore I'm sending you prophets and sages and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Others you are flogged in your synagogues and pursued from town to town. And so upon you will come all the righteous blood that has been shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zachariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly I tell you, all of this will come on this generation. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you. How often I've longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing. Look, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So we covered this 2 weeks ago. What's the point of this passage in Matthew chapter 23?
They're going to be judged by God, for one.
Okay, who
What they
is?
did and so on.
The
going-
teachers, the Pharisees, that
Yes.
are teaching
Yes.
falsely God's word.
The people who should know better.
Yes.
The people who are the religious leaders of the Jews, God's judging them. He's judging them already. And we looked at this 2 weeks ago, noticing Jesus doesn't pull any punches here. You know, we as Christians try to speak nice and speak in love and speak kindly and get along with people as best we can. Jesus, I think, he's at the end of his mission. He's, in my opinion, sick and tired of what he's had to put up with for the last 3.5 years. And as he's about to finish his time here on earth, he's calling it the way he sees it. You people are snakes. You people are evil. You people are corrupting everything, and you're going to pay the price. And so his point is for some reason my little clicker is not working. Let's see, there we go, my computer froze. The idea is the Pharisees, and we again touched on this already, they're going to be judged by God, as Paul said, and they're guilty of the blood of the prophets. And we looked a couple of weeks ago, he goes from Abel to Zechariah. That's exciting because that's A to Z, right? Which has nothing to do with the Bible, Hebrew, and Greek that is written in. It has to do with the first murder in the Bible, and as far as we know, the last prophet to die in the Old Testament. And so Jesus says, you guys are responsible for all of this, and their blood's on your hands. And so he says, all this is going to come on your generation. What generation is he talking about?
That one right there.
That one right there, the one he's talking to. He isn't talking end times down the road somewhere with the tribulation and 1,000-year reign and all that other stuff for here. Even if you don't buy into that, the time when Christ comes back, he isn't talking about that. He's talking about the people he's talking to right then. And in Matthew 23, it's quite clear that's who he's talking about. He's telling these people, your time is up. And he ends the passage by saying, I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And now we pick up the new stuff. Get to Mark. And again, as we look at the parable in Mark, I think, again, you've got to go back to the chapter before. You've got this passage there at the bottom of page 5. Jesus began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard. He put a wall around it, dug a pit for the winepress, and built a watchtower. Then he rented the vineyard to some farmers and moved to another place. At harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants to collect from them some of the fruit of the vineyard. But they seized him, beat him, and sent him away empty-handed. Then he sent another servant to them. They struck this man on the head and treated him shamefully. He sent still another, and that one they killed. He sent many others. Some of them they beat, others they killed. He had one left to send, a son whom he loved. If that didn't remind you of a Bible verse, you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
He sent him last of all, saying, they'll respect my son. But the tenants said to one another, this is the heir. Come, let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. So they took him and killed him and threw him out of the vineyard. What then will the owner of the vineyard do? He'll come and kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. Haven't you read the passage of Scripture? The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The Lord has done this. It is marvelous in our eyes. Then the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders looked for a way to arrest him. Notice this passage. Because they knew he had spoken the parable about them. But they were afraid of the crowd, so they left him and went away. 3 verses later, we continue. It says, as he taught, Jesus said, watch out for the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and they've come to the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor and banquets. They devour widows' houses for a show. They make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put, and people threw in large amounts. But a widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on. Same reading almost as Matthew 23, right? He's in the same setting, same idea. Mark's reporting some of the same stuff. He repeats some of the same ideas. You guys are horrible. You guys are not living right. You're not doing what you're supposed to. And then we get to Luke. The chapter before the parable we're looking at in Luke ends like this, and you've got this at the bottom of page 6. While all the people were listening, Jesus said to his disciples, "Beware of the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and have the most important seats in the synagogues and places of honor at the banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely." And then in chapter 21 begins, as Jesus looked up, he saw the rich putting their gifts into the treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 very small copper coins. "Truly I tell you," he said, "this widow has put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she out of her poverty put in all that she had." Same story exactly. I think it's easy to follow that we're watching the same scene unfold in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And so if you were to tell us what this initial introductory reading that I've just read to you is saying, what does it say?
Beware of the teachers of the law.
All right, beware of the people who teach the law. They're not living as they're supposed to live, right?
Right.
They're living incorrectly. They're taking advantage of you. They've abused their position, and they defrauded the people who put their trust in them. Jesus isn't pulling any punches here. And I think even though he's talking to them, it's a similar condemnation of people who lead churches today. If we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing, if we're not living the way we're supposed to be living, if we're not loving on people and treating them well, God would give us the same condemnation, I think. He would say to people who are leading churches today who aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, you guys are in big trouble. You people who should know better are doing poorly. So he says they're going to pay a price for their action. I think that's pretty clear. You can't read those passages we just read, I think, and not realize Jesus is telling those religious leaders, your time's up. You're about to pay for all this stuff that you've been doing. So get ready. And then he says, what we've already touched on, whatever's about to happen is going to happen in the time of the generation to whom he's speaking. And again, as we read these parables, these 3 about the fig tree, there's a lot of dispute on what time frame are we talking about. Are we talking about the destruction of the temple? Are we talking about the end of time? What's the point Jesus was trying to make? And if you just read that passage, it's easy to wonder. But if we read the context, which we push in here all the time, get the context. Don't just read the passage and try to figure it out. It's clear Jesus is talking to a specific group of people, and he's making it quite clear, you people have done something wrong, and the punishment's going to come in the generation that you're living in. Any questions about that? Any thoughts or wonders? Does that make sense?
Yet they still continued living their life.
They didn't change one bit.
No.
They didn't change one bit. We watch as a few chapters later, they're the ones leading the crucifixion. They're the ones doing this trial to find Jesus guilty because they don't want him. And that one passage says they knew who Jesus was talking about. They knew it was them that he's calling out on the carpet here. Paul.
Well, I thought one of the things too, there was what he's trying to get is love your neighbor, one of the things, and or love others, and also give to God what you can give. He talked about the poor lady,
Sure,
giving money, she could give, and the Pharisees would take that money and wander off with it.
yeah, they take the widow's money.
Yeah.
They take their homes. They cheat them out of whatever they can cheat them out of. And then when they give something to the temple, they make a big show out of it. And it isn't something they need because they've got more money than they need. They're giving part of the leftovers, so they don't even miss it.
The worst part of that is they're doing all of it in the name of the Lord.
That's exactly right. They believe they're the leaders of God's people. The Jews at this moment are God's people. They're his chosen nation, his favored people. And these are the leaders of these people who should know better. They could quote the law of Moses on one side and down the other. But they're not living it. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. That's why on another occasion Jesus says, do what they say, don't do what they do. They had the right words. They could quote the Bible and act like they knew what was right, but they weren't living right. And it's a challenge for religious people today not to get caught up in that. If you're going to act like you're God's people, live the way God's people are supposed to act. Don't profess to be one thing and live some other way, because that's not what God's calling for. It's not what He wants. Anything else about that? Pharisees, I think, are in big trouble. So you've got the next passage right below that, and again, we're going to read a lot tonight. So this, I think, to clarify that he's really talking about these people. The verse in Matthew says, truly I tell you, all this will come on this generation. In Mark account, he says, they devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely. Not somebody else, not some people living thousands of years later. These men are going to pay. And then the Luke account, the teachers of the law and the chief priests looked for a way to arrest him immediately because they knew he had spoken this parable about them. And then he ends this again by saying, these men will be punished most severely. I don't think there's any question. Jesus is setting the scene to say, what I'm about to tell you predominantly is going for you to hear. You people who are living in my time frame need to be paying attention to this, because this is about to happen, all right? And then we get this passage, and you've got this as well on the bottom of page 7. Matthew has this account. It says, Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. We're in the same context, right? We're just moved into the next chapter, but it's still all the same people hanging around there. We haven't switched to some new locale. But his disciples have come up and said, they told him about the building. Jesus says, do you see all these things? He asked. Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they said, when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Why do you think they ask about the end of the age?
Who's scared about the happenings?
Well, they're
want their
concerned about
land
what's going to
back.
happen.
They just want their possessions back, the land.
Yeah,
They promised to them.
they're still looking
They're
for
still looking for that.
a physical kingdom, right? We've looked at that in Acts on Sunday morning. They're wondering, when's the kingdom going to be restored? Are you now going to restore the kingdom? And Jesus says, basically, you don't have a clue what you're talking about. You don't even understand. But here they are asking, what is this about the end of the age? What has he said about an end of an age so far?
That these teachers of the law are going to be punished.
Yeah, but did he use that term, end of the age?
No.
He hasn't mentioned that yet. So why do they ask, when's this going to happen, and when's the end of the age? Why do you think they ask that question?
Because he mentioned
Come back.
generation.
Okay, maybe that generation, but notice Jesus doesn't say in any of these readings yet, this whole generation is going to be wiped out. It's just you bad guys are going to get punished. Paul, what did you say?
When is he coming back?
Yeah, but why are they asking that? He hadn't gone anywhere yet.
Yeah, no.
Why are they asking, when are you coming back?
Because he got support for them. He can do whatever he wants to do.
And that's true, and you're on the right track.
Does it go back to I was just going to say,
Yeah.
does it go back to
It goes back to Jesus' last statement, I think, when he says, I tell you, you'll not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. That's an Old Testament prophecy, an Old Testament wording. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And Jesus says, he's here in their group, right? He's in the midst of all these people. He says, you're not going to see me again until this happens. And people are saying, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And I think that phrase get the disciples thinking. Wait, what do you mean we're not going to see you again? Where are you going?
Yeah.
And when are you coming back? Not the end of the age, end of time. And we talked about this a little on Sunday morning. The end of the age of the Jewish nation. Jesus has already said over and over, and now he's telling them. Remember, he said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I love you, is gather you like a hen would gather your chicks, but you won't, and your city's going to be left desolate. And I think the disciples are finally starting to pick up, even though they haven't got it yet. They're starting to pick up that there's some radical change coming. And again, if you read through the Old Testament, most of the references to end of age and the last days all have to do with some time frame of stuff on earth. It doesn't have to do with the end of eternity. It doesn't have to do with the destruction of the earth, because those people in those days didn't even think about that. There's nothing in the Old Testament that talks about that these people would be considering. But Jesus has now said, you're not going to see me again until I come back, and people are saying, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So if the disciples are thinking, okay, what's he talking about? When's this going to happen? Give us an idea of a time frame that you're talking about. And I think that's where we're at. Notice in the Mark account says, as Jesus is leaving the temple, and you've got this on page 8, one of his disciples said, look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings. I don't know about you, but I read this passage and I'm thinking, Jesus has just blasted the religious leaders of his day. That would be like us yelling at Billy Graham, or T.D. Jakes, or pick some big preacher that you can think of, Charles Stanley. And Jesus shows up and says, all you people, you're just useless, and I'm just using them as examples. I don't think you necessarily say that about them.
Yeah.
But it would be that idea that Jesus labels all these religious leaders of our day, maybe even the Pope and his cardinals, or the Mormon, apostles, or, some religious groups, and he says, you people are horrible, and your day's coming. And the next thing we know, the disciples are saying, oh, by the way, look at this building. And I'm thinking, zoom! Do they just not want to talk about this? Are they just so flabbergasted they don't even want to bring up a conversation with Jesus to say, why did you do that? It's, oh, look at this magnificent building. Isn't it fabulous? And Jesus says to them, do you see all these great buildings? Not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, and John and Andrew are asking privately, tell us, when will these things happen, and what will be the sign that they are all about to be fulfilled? Here's a specific question that leads us to what's Jesus talking about. He's just told them the temple is going to be destroyed. So now they're saying, not tell us about the end of the age, it's when are these things going to happen? And then look at Luke. It says some of his disciples were remarking about how the temple was adorned with beautiful stones and with gifts dedicated to God. But Jesus said, and as for what you see here, the time will come when not one stone will be left on another. Every one of them will be thrown down. Teacher, they asked, when will these things happen, and what will be the sign that they are about to take place? Seems pretty clear to me. Jesus right here, initially in the 3 chapters that we're looking at, is talking about the destruction of the temple. The building itself, which signifies who?
The building?
Yeah, what does the temple signify for the people?
God with them?
Yeah, that's where God is. That's their religious monument. This is the sign that we're the people of God. We've got his temple here. And Jesus is saying there's coming a time when every one of these stones is going to be torn down. There won't be one on top of the other. And the specific question in Mark and Matthew, or Mark and Luke, is, when's this going to happen, Paul?
Well, there's another church too, Christ's church, and he got destroyed in 30 AD.
Yeah, but he's not talking about that.
Yeah, I know.
These people are asking
He referred
specifically,
himself as
tell me about the stones. Because, again, here's Jesus talking about religious purity, living right, treating people well, and suddenly all they're concerned about is this beautiful building.
But they
They're doing no thought of, are we treating people well?
It seems like that's a great example of the clash between the physical, which we primarily are, and the spiritual.
I think you're right, because that temple was the physical.
And that was the only thing they could really.
That's what God is. Yeah, they can
That's all
see,
they can
they
relate
go
to.
there, they travel there, Pentecost, Passover, all these places. They show up in Jerusalem to come to the temple. It's the sanctuary for their whole Jewish faith, because God lives in that temple. That's where he is. That's where the high priest goes and prays.
But
And
they've
goes-
been taught that from the beginning of when
Yeah,
Moses, and
absolutely.
he gave them the exact cubics and all
Yes.
this building. I mean, it's in there. I mean, it must be important because it's in the Bible in several places,
Has to
how to
be.
build this temple. So the size of it and the layout and the north gate and the east gate and all that, there has to be a reason why it's in there more than once.
Sure.
I don't know what it is, but
Well, because it was where God was.
right.
That was where, that's his home.
But I mean, it was
During
so
this time
specific. It's so specific in there, you know,
It
as
is.
far as size and where it's to be and where everybody's supposed to live around it and.
Because God wants his house
Yes.
to be right.
Right.
And if we think today we are the house of God, he wants us to be right. He's given us specific ways to do what we're supposed to be doing, and we can either do it that way or not. But I think God's got the point. He's griping at these Pharisees because of their religious imperfections. They don't want to talk about that. They want to look and say, yeah, but we got the temple. How can we be that bad? We've got the temple. And if we're going to talk about that in our life today, what might we say? If somebody was to say, you know, your life isn't what it should be, how might you respond in order to deflect that question?
I go to church every Sunday.
That's exactly right. But I go to church every Sunday. I tithe. I'm in a Bible study on Monday night. What more do you want? Don't you think if we're not careful, we can do the same deflection of God who's concerned about our spiritual well-being, and we cover it up by doing stuff? Yeah, but I go to church every Sunday. You know, and I do this or that, John.
We make excuses for not being where we need to be. We check the boxes off in other areas that are easy.
Yeah, because we don't want to talk about the other stuff itself.
Correct.
It's, what does God want of me? I show up on Sunday. I come to a Bible study on Monday. You know, I do this, I do that. But it's all physical stuff that we're trying to prove. Look how good I am. And what did we talk about Sunday? If you don't have love, and I left this verse out of that passage, Paul in 1 Corinthians 13 says, you can give away everything you own, you can give your body to be burned, but if you don't have what? Love. You can show us your arm. It's nothing. Yeah, I mean, there it is. And I think sometimes we do that. We want to act like, look how good I am. I go to church, I tithe, I build a house for Habitat for Humanity, I do all these other things, I work gym, I lead a Bible study class. I mean, look at all this stuff I do. And I'm afraid sometimes God could look at us and say, you know, that's really nice, but you've missed the whole idea. The idea is to change who you are from the inside out, and you can't do that from the outside in. You can't cover up your imperfections by the physical stuff that we do.
I think people get corrupted. I'm not bringing up politics, but it's like politicians, the House and the Senate. When they first get in there, like brand new, they're young and they have good ideas and, you know, but then to me, they get corrupted. And when you've been in there 30, 40, 50 years, I mean, forever,
Sure.
all they want now is the money and the perks
Status
that
quo.
come with it.
Yeah.
Huh?
The status quo.
That's right, but they forgot why they're here for the people,
Yeah.
supposedly, but they forgot that. So the Pharisees and stuff, you know, in the beginning, they're learning blah, 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 and then they get all this attention and all this prestige, they forgot all that.
Yeah.
You know,
There
they're
you
just
go.
now,
Yeah. We've got our status, we've got our
Yeah.
prestige, and all they want to do is get reelected. And again, that's a blanket statement. I'm praying to God there's a few people in the House and the Senate who really want to do what's best for this nation instead of just get reelected.
well, that's why there needs to be term limits. I mean, just like, and I'm not getting political, but it's like the Pharisees.
It is.
You're in it for,
To die.
Life.
18 and you
And you watch
get
what
educated and stuff,
what
and
the
you're
Pharisees
die.
are doing is the same idea. They've got their positions of power. They're never going to have to go back and be a poor widow.
Yeah.
Ever. They're set for life.
Yeah.
And I love to hear a politician say, oh, I can identify with you common people.
Yeah.
Boy, you don't
Like
have,
that
most of
doctor
you have been in
in
there for so
Right.
long, you don't have a clue what we're dealing with. You're not paying gas prices. You're not being told you can't fly unless you get a COVID shot. You're doing whatever you
Different
want to
medical,
do.
different whatever, why are you so special? I mean, yeah.
Because they let themselves be.
That's
which is
exactly right.
exactly what these guys
Exactly.
were. And so as Jesus says, all this stuff's gonna be torn down. Did that ever happen?
Yeah.
When?
70 AD.
70 AD. Titus comes in, wipes the place out. Literally, stone by stone, tearing everything from that temple. There was not one stone left. Why did they do that? Why did the Romans do that?
I mean, because it was,
Historians tell us they did it because there was so much gold and precious metals in the temple that they wanted everything moved so they could get every scrap of it. They didn't want to leave any stones standing up because all the stones had jewels in them. They were inlaid with gold. They were overlaid with silver. I mean, we can't even imagine in our life what that must be like, what that building must have looked like. But it had so many precious stones and so many precious metals in it that one of the reasons historians say they tore it stone by stone and moved every stone out of the way was so they could scrape off and get every piece of precious metal and jewel they could get. But Jesus says that's what's going to happen. Paul.
They also look at the fact that they wanted to get rid of the gods that they dealt with, that Christians dealt with, and so on, because they're the rulers for their gods.
Sure.
For the most part. And they had other gods too, right? But you look around the world, it's happened many times in all different countries and so on. Missionaries used to go to South America and they'd be killed for a period of time. Right now in China, I keep hearing about, that China's putting pressure on anybody who's, Christian, they're going after them at this point in time, so they're destroying these things.
And the world's always going to try to do that. They don't want to hear Christianity. They want Christianity silenced because it's about the only religion out there that tells you what to do that's right. Most other religions have all kinds of things. Your Muslim, God help them, they go murder people in the way theirs. Part of their sanctity of life is murdering the infidels. What kind of religion is that? Christianity's got morals and rules, and most people don't want them. And so, across the board, Christians are persecuted. So, back to your new handout. Lesson number 2. What's the original question asked by the disciples? We discovered that.
When things happen?
Yeah, when's it gonna happen? When are these things going to take place? That's what's on their mind as Jesus starts talking to them about what's going to happen and what has he just talked about.